Today I'm going to show you how to make a walk cycle. This is going to be a pretty simple and basic one, but we're going to use the rain character from the Blender Foundation. You've got the license right here that shows up when you open this character. Rain rig is released under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Attribution is copyright Blender Foundation. So there's our attribution, and I've also taken the liberty of typing up my own walk cycle instructions and pasting them in here, so you should be able to look over and kind of see what's going on. They're numbered, just 6 steps. So before we get started, there's a few positions here in the walk cycle that we need to understand what they are and what they're called, so that we can kind of start with a common vocabulary. So to start off with a walk cycle, I always make 3 contact positions. Let me show you what that looks like. So if we've got our person walking here, they're going to have 1 foot forward. We'll have it kind of extended out a little more. This is basically the point at which their front foot touches the ground. I call that the traction foot. And their other foot that has just been walking is just about to leave the ground. It's been propelling them forward. And that is called contact. Now, in between contact positions, we have what's called passing, which is a little more vertical. Our traction foot is mostly down underneath the person, and our other foot is passing the traction foot. So this foot is coming forward, and this foot is relative to the body going backward, even though it's actually touching the ground. So this is passing. And then of course you go back to a contact position, but with the other foot forward. Basically the front and rear feet swap. So if this is left and this is right, on the next contact, then this foot is right and this foot is left. And in between contact, passing, and contact, you actually, that's where your high and low positions go. So after contact, when people first start messing with walk cycles, often they assume that contact is the low position and passing is high, but low and high actually come after those. There's a little bit of a delay. It's kind of a secondary action. So the height of the head actually goes like this. And this is just a delay of, a few frames is all. It's not actually like perfectly halfway in between, although it can be. You move these low and high positions around in time, and it will change the feel of the walk. We're going to call low down and high up sometimes, just because I know my weaknesses, and that's almost certainly going to happen. So we'll kind of refer back to this a little bit, but in order to be cyclic, then we also have a second passing position in here. And we also have a third contact position, which that can be a little confusing for people sometimes too. Just we have an even number of feet, and we have an odd number of contact positions, so that throws people off. But the important thing to remember there is that first contact and third contact are identical. These two are twins. And that's what makes this cyclic. It makes it able to repeat in infinity. So we'll pay attention to that and just kind of remember that. Feel free to go back and refer back to this if it starts to get confusing, but that's how we're going to make this walk cycle. Okay, so now that we have those concepts in mind, we can keep referring back to those mentally. Let's start off by making our contact position. So I have the left foot selected here on rain, and what I'm going to do is just go into a right orthographic viewport, and I'm going to tap G and Y, and then I'm going to rotate in X just kind of to make my first contact position. So there's my front foot. I'm going to select the next foot, GY, just kind of put it backward, and you can get extreme, you can stretch here, but I am going to just make this a fairly conservative walk cycle. And you know, the other thing I should do right now, because there's so much movement here and I don't necessarily want to be keeping track of all of the bones that I move, is I'm going to turn on auto key, so that anytime I transform a bone, that is, I move it, I scale it, I rotate it, it's going to just automatically keyframe. So I've moved 2 bones so far, so I'm going to select the first one and tap I. Whoops, and it looks like I have a keying set enabled. So let's see what that is. Okay, it's set to location and rotation, and that's actually what I would have keyframed there anyway. I'm kind of used to the little pop-up dialog. So I'm going to also tap I for the rear foot, and I'm going to keyframe the foot roll controllers here as well. So tap I, and then I'm going to actually roll this one so that the knee bends a little bit. So I have all 4 of these bones, both foot parents and foot roll controllers, keyframed on frame 1 now. You'll notice something else I've done down here, and that is that I have shortened my timeline to just 29 frames. I'm going to make this walk cycle 30 frames long. So playback is only going to go 29 frames. And the reason for that is that the first and last frames of a walk cycle should be identical. And so we don't necessarily want those frames playing twice, so it goes 1 through 30 and then back to 1. It plays 30 and then 1. So I'm going to have it stop playback at 29. Okay, so now that we've done that, I am going to copy this pose, because I've basically made my contact position pose the way I want it. I have all 4 bones selected, so I'm going to hit Control C. And I have a copy attributes add-on enabled, and it brings up this little pop-up. If you don't have this add-on enabled, then by default this just copies your pose. So either way it will work. You don't need this add-on enabled for what we're doing here. But I'm going to click on Copy Pose, and you'll see we get this little message down here, Copied Pose to Buffer. So our pose is in the buffer, and I can come forward here to frame 15, which is going to be halfway through my walk cycle, and I can paste this pose flipped over the x-axis. So paste x flipped, and that will be under my pose menu, paste pose flipped, and you can see the shortcut is Shift Control V. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of the tutorial, is just use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift V, and that pastes the pose X flipped, and because I have auto key enabled, you can see it's keyframed all those movements. So now let's go all the way down to frame 30, and we will paste the pose again, but this time we're not pasting it flipped. Remember, the original pose is what's stored in the buffer. So I'm going to hit Control V and just paste that back. And now if we play, you can see that we have movement here. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Matter of fact, it's pretty awful at this point. But it worked. It's starting to sort of resemble a walk cycle a little bit. Okay, so those are our contact positions. We've made 3 of them: first frame, middle frame, and last frame. We've keyframed the foot control and the foot roll on all those frames. You can see that down here in our dope sheet that we have master foot parent L, master foot parent R, and both of the foot controls all have keyframes. All right, and for some reason I'm not seeing all of my, there we go. If we twirl those down as well, you'll see we have location, rotation, and scale controls for all of those. All right, so our next step is to create our passing positions, and these are going to come roughly halfway in between the contact positions. So I started with my left foot forward because I used to be in marching band and we always started on the left foot, so that's just kind of why I have that habit. You don't have to. But that means my left foot is my traction foot. It's what's actually should be touching the ground and coming along back here. So I'm going to go halfway between my first 2 contact positions, and I know at this point the right foot should be passing the left foot and the left foot should be on the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the foot controller on the left foot and clear out my rotations, Alt-R. And then I'm going to select the foot roll and clear out the rotations there, Alt-R, so that that foot ends up on the ground. Then I'm going to select the right foot and I'm going to rotate it so that it's actually pointing kind of the other direction, and then I'm going to move it in Z. When people walk, our toes actually come really close to scraping the ground. We don't actually, we don't really pick up our feet all that much. We tend to walk pretty efficiently and use a minimum amount of energy. So I'm going to reflect that here. I'm also going to clear out the foot roll, Alt-R. And so all of those changes were just keyframed, which made a passing pose. So now, just like with the contact positions, I'm going to copy this pose, select these 4 bones, Control C and copy the pose, and then halfway between the other 2 contact positions, I'm going to paste X flipped, Control Shift V. Okay, and let's see what that looks like. So you can see that Rain is now picking up her feet, and that looks a lot better than it did. So our next step is, now that we've created contacts and passing positions, our next step is going to be to slap the foot down. And this this one gets neglected a lot, but it's kind of an important thing for this character not to feel robotic and too smooth and to give him a little bit of weight. So what I'm going to do here is just maybe 2 frames after the initial contact positions, I'm going to clear out the rotation on the foot rolls, or not on the foot rolls, sorry, on the foot controls. So Alt-R, basically this foot's going to make contact and then it's going to immediately slap down over the course of 2 frames. And I'm going to do that on my other foot here, advance 2 frames, and Alt-R, clear out that rotation, and it's keyframed. And basically what that does is just slap, slap, slap. Just gets that foot down on the ground with full traction as quickly as possible. So I'm pretty happy with that. If you want to adjust what's happening, you can move these keyframes around a little bit. See, I'm not in a dope sheet here, am I? This is just a timeline, so I'm going to split out my window here, collapse my timeline so I just have my playback controls, and I'm going to make this second window into a dope sheet so that I can actually move my frames around. Okay, so contact position right here. And let's expand that so we can see a little better what's going on. select both feet. We've got both feet visible here. So here is the slap down position for the left foot. Here's the slap down position, or keyframes for the right foot. So if I select both of those, I can actually just move them, make that slap be a little more relaxed, or I can make it just take one frame and be really aggressive. Slap, slap, kind of a snap to the walk. I like 2 frames though. I feel like that's a good balance. It's not too slow, it's not too fast. For this particular walk cycle, I think that works. All right, and our next step is going to be an X shift on our contact positions. And this is where most of my students tend to get a little bit lost in the woods. So what we're going to do is look at this walk cycle from the front view. You can see that like these feet are moving very straight, and that's not how people walk. You're going to treat this this change differently depending on the character and depending on how they should walk. If you want a very kind of traditionally feminine walk, then you're going to exaggerate what we're going to do here, and if you want like somebody that's really obese and sort of needs to waddle or something like that, then you might actually take this whole thing in the opposite direction. But basically what we need to do is just move these feet in their X position so that they kind of come in front of each other. And this can get a little bit confusing because there are 3 contact positions, and anyway, just follow along very carefully and you'll be okay. So the X location on this foot is currently 0, and this is the traction foot. It's the left foot from a front view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this just slightly so that it kind of starts to cross over the center of this x-axis, which is indicated by our blue y-axis here, or z-axis here. So basically this character is kind of going to act like they're on a tightrope just a little bit. So that frame is updated, just the X location, because I have auto key on. I'm going to twirl this down so that I can see this, and I'm also, just for the sake of visual clarity, I'm not using any of these scaled keyframes, so I'm going to delete them. All I have here is my location and rotation keyframes, and at this point I just updated this X location. So this X location, I want it to stay constant, not to slide. You can see this foot is sliding around. I want this X location to stay the same as long as the foot's on the ground. So I'm just going to select this one keyframe, X location, and hit Shift D and duplicate it forward to the end of this foot's contact position so that it stays on the ground. And then at that point, it's welcome to swing back out to its original X position, which I haven't changed, but I need it to land back in the same spot as frame 1, because frame 30 and frame 1, the first and last frames, should be identical, and they're not currently. So what I need to do is take this X location keyframe and duplicate it one more time over to frame 30. And what that does is it gives me a little bit of swing in the feet there. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with the other foot now. And let's see, actually we're going to copy this pose really quick so we get this identical. So in the center contact position, this is the opposite pose from where the right foot starts. So what I'm going to do is, just with this one foot bone selected, I'm going to copy that pose, go back to the start where the right foot should be there, and Control Shift V, paste X flipped. So now we have our X location for the right foot. And again, I'm going to just come in here and delete all these scale keyframes so that we don't have the visual confusion there. Okay, so this X location keyframe is correct for all contact positions of the right foot. But the right foot's next position is a passing position. So it should actually, I don't want to duplicate, I don't want to overwrite the X position on passing. I don't want these feet to pass through each other when they pass. So it needs to swing around like this. And then when it comes down here, it needs to go back to that new X position. So I'm going to select that keyframe and duplicate it and drag it all the way over here to frame 15 so that this foot swings around and then comes down and pops down. And from there, I know my X position needs to stay constant because this foot's becoming the traction foot. So now we've got a little bit of kind of a swing around with those feet, so that contact positions X shift has been accomplished. Okay, and this is starting to look okay. But if we look at the whole character, of course, still very robotic. It's time to deal with the pelvis. So let's grab this pelvis parent, and you'll remember from the drawing we have low and high positions, or down and up positions, shortly after contact and passing. I find it easiest to just keyframe these on contact and passing, and then shift them with the dope sheet afterwards. So that's what we're going to do here. So this is contact, frame 1, and I'm going to just grab this hip controller and create my down position. And then I'm going to put just a little bit of, you know what, actually we'll handle that later. So there's my down position, and now I'm going to copy that pose and paste it on the other two contact positions. Okay, now for my up positions, I'm going to go to my passing positions, which in this walk cycle are frame 8 and frame 23. And I'm just going to move the whole character up. Copy that pose and paste it on the other side. Okay, and you can see that now that brings a little more life to the character, but it's still pretty robotic because this up and down motion of the hips is not really being treated as a secondary action. There's no delay in it. So I'm going to select all 5 of these keyframes that I just made, and I'm just going to move them. Let's try 3 frames at first. And that mostly solves the problem, but you'll notice at the beginning it creates a weird issue because we no longer have, not only are our first and last frames not identical, but there are no keyframes there in frame 30 and frame 29. But since we shifted all these keyframes forward, and we have a keyframe on 26 and a keyframe now on 33, which is beyond the limits of our walk cycle, Blender is interpolating back here even after we've told it to end playback. So this position on frame 30 is actually correct. It's what we need on frame 1, but it's not a keyframe. So all we need to do here is just keyframe this value. So I'm going to tap I, keyframe the location and rotation, and now I'm going to select that new keyframe on 30 and duplicate it back to 1. And you'll see that takes care of that little pop, that sudden jerk that we had at the beginning there. And now I still have keyframes on frame 33, but they're no longer necessary. I can delete them. My beginning and ending positions are once again identical. So that takes care of the hips up and down. So now we can take care of the arm swing. And arms kind of do the same thing as the hips in that they have a little bit of a delay in terms of their swing, but generally they swing opposite the legs. So if we start with the left foot forward, we're going to start with the left arm back. But its widest position, its backmost position is actually going to be delayed a little bit after contact. But I'm going to treat this the same way as we did the delay on the hips. I'm going to keyframe this on the contact positions, and then I'm going to just move my keyframes to accomplish my delay. So from a front view, I'm just going to kind of move this hand into position. I'm not going to give her a lot of arm swing here because people don't actually swing their arms all that much. This is a pretty relaxed walk cycle. Okay, so there's our first position for the left hand, and now we'll position our right hand, which is going to be the forward hand. Okay, and we could probably turn these in just a little. Alright, so there's my hands wide position, and I'm going to copy that pose. Go to my next contact position and paste X flipped, Control Shift V. Then go to my last position and paste it traditionally, Control V. Okay. And that's looking okay-ish, except of course our hands are actually clipping through. So we'll create some passing positions now. And that's not too difficult. We just need to, actually I think I'm just going, whoa, that's a local axis, so we'll move it globally. We'll just kind of flip the hands out a little bit here. And there's our passing position. We'll copy that pose, paste it X flipped. Okay, so we're no longer clipping through the pants. That's good. Alright, and now we need to delay this action just a little bit. So I'm going to delay it just a couple of frames. I don't think it should be quite as delayed as the hips, but I might change my mind. Let's see what that looks like. You can see we've got a weird little pop at the beginning, just like we did with the hips. That's again because we have no keyframe here and no keyframe here at 30. But again, since we've moved our keyframes, we actually have the information to make the keyframe we need. So with both of these bones selected, I'm going to keyframe and then duplicate my keyframe back to the beginning, and then delete the extras at the end. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I think the last thing I'm going to do here, and this isn't really in my list because at this point we've basically accomplished a very basic walk cycle, but I'm going to put just a little twist in the hips on those down and up positions. So I'm going to select the pelvis, find my down, and whoop, that's not the right one, and I'm going to twist the hips just a little bit so that as the body's weight comes down and the force translates down through the leg, the downward force of gravity, that the more relaxed hip or the more relaxed foot basically gets to sink a little farther. So I'm just going to twist this way just a little bit and then copy that pose. And then the next, let's see, that was 1, 2, 3 frames past our initial contact. So here's 1, 2, 3 frames. We'll paste that flipped. And then 1, 2, 3, we'll paste that again. And now, of course, we need keyframes on our very beginning and very ending frames. So I'm going to keyframe the position here that's interpolated between 18 and 33. And then duplicate that back to 1. And we can delete our extras at the end. You can see that that gives her just a little bit of a twist in the hips, which feels a lot more organic. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I hope that's helpful. But that's basically how you create a walk cycle.